Just 85 miles from the hustle and bustle of New York City, there's this island, a government-owned patch of land that you won't find on most maps. It's guarded, it's secret, and for decades, nobody really knew what was going on there. But then, in the late 2000s, its secrets started, well, they started washing ashore. So it all kicked off in July of 2008. One day, this thing shows up on a beach in Montauk. Nobody could figure out what it was, not the locals, not even the animal experts. And that single, bizarre discovery, it was just the first piece of a puzzle that would point to a horrifying truth just a few miles across the water. First came the Montauk Monster, this creature that looked like it was pieced together from 3 different animals. Then, more weird carcasses started showing up. But things took a really dark turn in 2010. A human body was found, 6 feet tall, with these freakishly large fingers and 5 holes drilled right into its skull. It looked like something out of a sci-fi nightmare. And here's the thing. When you look at a map, it's less than 10 miles from where all this stuff was found. There was really only one place that could explain the unexplainable: the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. Suddenly, the prime suspect had a name. Okay, so to really get what was going on, we have to rewind. We have to go back to the very beginning of this island facility. See, this wasn't just some run-of-the-mill research lab. Its origins are tangled up with the fall of Nazi Germany and some of history's most infamous scientists. So, here's the official story. Plum Island was there to study animal diseases to protect America's food supply. Sounds pretty noble, right? But the reality, well, the evidence points to something much, much darker. The real mission was to create bioweapons, and it was founded by an expert recruited straight from the Third Reich. The timeline here is just chillingly direct. During World War II, a guy named Erich Traub is running Hitler's biowarfare program. The war ends, and the U.S. starts a top-secret program called Operation Paperclip to snatch up Nazi scientists. Traub was one of their prizes. And by 1954, he's helped build an American version of his Nazi lab right off the coast of New York. And listen to this. This isn't just speculation. This is a direct quote from someone who actually worked on Plum Island back in the 50s. They said, flat out, that they were infecting ticks and then just letting them go, right there on the island. The exact work Traub was famous for was happening on U.S. soil from day one. But here's the thing about secret research with deadly germs. It doesn't always stay secret, and it definitely doesn't stay on the island. The consequences were absolutely devastating, hitting entire countries and quiet American towns. Take 1971. All of a sudden, Cuba's entire pig population, a huge source of their food, gets completely wiped out by African swine fever. This had never happened in the Western Hemisphere before. Cuba immediately pointed the finger at the CIA. And what's the smoking gun? The only lab in this half of the world with live samples of that exact virus was Plum Island. Just 4 years later, that problem lands right on America's doorstep. This time, it's in a small, peaceful town called Old Lyme, Connecticut. People, especially kids, started getting sick with this really strange illness that local doctors had just never seen before. I mean, can you imagine? People were getting these bizarre bullseye rashes. Their joints were swelling up painfully, they were getting paralyzed, and some even experienced psychosis. It was a terrifying medical mystery, and it was spreading fast. And then, when they started plotting these cases on a map, a really disturbing picture started to form. The geographic center, ground zero, for this new disease, which we now know as Lyme disease, was directly across the Long Island Sound, from Plum Island. The proximity was just undeniable. Okay, and this is where the story just goes completely off the rails. The guy who gets all the public credit for discovering the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, his name was Willy Bergdorfer. What they didn't tell you is that he was also a U.S. military bioweapons specialist whose job was, you guessed it, weaponizing ticks. And before he died, he actually admitted that the Lyme outbreak was probably one of their experiments gone horribly wrong. So you start to think, wow, this is crazy, but the really scary part is it wasn't just Plum Island. The truth is that America's most high-security biolabs have a long, terrifying history of screw-ups, negligence, and major security failures. I mean, just look at this stuff. At Plum Island, they were literally using duct tape to seal secure doors. Of course, diseases got out, twice. At the CDC, you've got live anthrax just sitting in unlocked refrigerators. A researcher at Fort Detrick gets accidentally stuck with an Ebola needle. They even found forgotten vials of live smallpox at the NIH. This isn't a couple of mistakes. This is a deeply broken system. And you'd think there'd be some kind of oversight, right? Well, think again. A 2007 report found that more than 100 labs with the ability to make bioweapons just refused to be inspected. And what happened? The government gave them a pass. The lack of accountability is just staggering. Okay, so that's all history. But why does any of this matter to you right here, right now? Because the experiments they did back then might be the reason for some of the health crises we're facing today. And that culture of secrecy, it hasn't gone anywhere. I want you to just think about this one number for a second, 300,000. That is the number of irradiated experimental ticks that our own government specialists intentionally released into the wild in the late 1960s. This wasn't a lab leak. This was on purpose. And one of the species they let loose was the Lone Star tick. This thing is like the perfect hunter. It doesn't wait for you, it hunts you by smell. It can swarm in groups of up to 10,000. It can survive being frozen or underwater. Oh, and its bite can make you permanently allergic to red meat. And guess what? Since they released it, its territory has exploded from just the southeast to pretty much the entire eastern US. It all feels pretty bleak, I know. But here's what we can actually do. The answer is transparency. It starts with getting to know your local representatives and demanding, not asking, demanding that safety protocols for any research labs in your area are made public. And you can use the Freedom of Information Act to request the results of any investigations. You have a right to know what's happening in your own backyard. And that brings us to this final, really unsettling thought. Plum Island is supposed to be closing down, but all its research, all those dangerous pathogens, they're just moving it to Kansas, right into the heart of America's food supply. So the lab is moving, but the secrets, the culture of negligence, and all the risks are moving right along with it. Which leaves us with one big question. Are we really any safer?